But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. The word of the Lord. I want to begin this morning by asking you to take a look at your watch. Not because I want you to time my sermon, but I want you to just to take a quick look at it. Does it tell the time? Is it an hour earlier than it was last week at this time? So does it tell the right time? And even if it doesn't, even a broken watch is right twice a day. All right, so does your watch have a name on it, a brand? Does it say Timex or maybe Fossil or Citizens or Casio or Swatch or Seiko? Actually, I stopped wearing watches a few years ago. My wrists are so small. When I get a watch, it would slide up the middle of my forearm. So I would get a watch, and then I'd have to go find the small bands, and they were hard to find. And then I started just using pocket watches. And then cell phones came out, and that was much better because they had bigger numbers. And as my eyes were getting older, that was good. But back to your watches. Basically, all watches perform the same function. They tell time. Doesn't matter if it's a Timex or a Rolex. Both tell the time. Average prices for a Timex range from $35 to $150. A Rolex, on the other hand, is a bit more expensive. They range in price from $4,000 to $15,000, and there's some models that are even more expensive than that. Now that's quite a price difference, from $35 for the Timex to $15,000 for the Rolex, for a device that basically tells the same function. They both tell time. But they tell more than that. Crafted from the finest materials, designed to the most exacting standards. I got that from the Rolex webpage. The Rolex company wants its customers to know that it is a superior watch. It's better than all those other watches. It's special. There's an economist named Thorstein Veblen who wrote about such things. Veblen lived from 1857 to 1929, and he was a critic of capitalism. He wrote that people who bought expensive things, whether they were watches or homes or cars, did so because they wanted other people to know that they could afford them. They wanted other people to know that they were successful, that they were rich, that they were special. Veblen called it conspicuous consumption. Consumption that was done so that other people could observe it. For example, the watch that has the name Rolex on it. It lets people know, ooh, he can afford a Rolex. Veblen had some other ideas about consumption. He called children conspicuous waste. The idea of trying to set oneself above the rest of society is no new problem. We even have lots of examples in the Bible. Indeed, we see examples in today's passage from Matthew. And who do we see it coming from? The religious leaders of the day. And we see Jesus pointing them out and undeniably stating that what he sees was wrong. In this passage, we see the Jewish lineage and continuity of the leadership of the faith. Moses handed down the leadership to Joshua, and Joshua passed it on to the elders, who passed it down to the prophets, who gave it to the scribes and the Pharisees. And the scribes and the Pharisees taught people all the laws of faith. That's why Jesus tells them at the beginning of the passage that as much as the Pharisees have taught you, you should obey them. The Pharisees have taught reverence to God and respect to people. And actually, those are two of the core principles of the Ten Commandments. Reverence to God. We see commandments requiring reverence for God, reverence for God's name, for God's day, for the parents God has given us. The other core is respect. Respect for a person's life, respect for a person's possessions, his good name, for oneself. These are eternal principles. And for that, Jesus respects the teaching of the scribes and the Pharisees. But their whole outlook on religion had a fundamental effect on people that he disagreed with. It made religion a thing of hundreds and hundreds of rules and regulations. It made their religion an intolerable burden. Did their leadership of the faith lift people up, or did it drag them down? Was it a joy, or was it a depression? Were its followers helped, or were they haunted? When a religion becomes a depressing list of burdens and prohibitions, it ceases to be a true religion. But the Pharisees, they wouldn't give an inch. Their whole purpose was to build up a fence around the law. They would not relax or remove one single regulation. Worse, the religion of the Pharisees became almost inevitably a religion of ostentation, of showing off, of conspicuous consumption. Since religion was merely obeying rules and regulations, it became easy for everyone to be aware of how well a person followed the rules, and therefore how perfect was their piety. Jesus selected a few of their actions to point out that the Pharisees were showing their conspicuous consumption. They didn't practice what they preached. Devout Jewish men wear two distinct items during their morning prayers, and they're called phylacteries. They originate in the book of Exodus in a verse that says, "It shall be a mark upon your hand or the frontlets between your eyes." And they're worn every morning except for the Sabbath and special holy days. And they're like little leather boxes. And one is strapped to the forehead, and the other is strapped on the forearm. The one on the wrist has a compartment in it, and in it is a parchment with 4 passages from Exodus and Deuteronomy. The one on the forehead also has 4 compartments with one little scroll in each compartment, each with one of the 4 verses written on it. The Pharisees, in order to draw attention to themselves, wore really big phylacteries. This was meant to display their obedience to the law and their exemplary piety, that they were special. In Deuteronomy, God commands his people to make fringes on the borders of their garments. This was to be done so that they looked at their garments, they would remember the commandments of God. Later, those became tassels and were worn inside the garment. Today, you see the modern version of these as the fringes of prayer shawls, which devout Jews wear at prayer. During the time of Jesus, the Pharisees wore oversized tassels on the outside of their garments. They made them as large and as ostentatious as the display of their piety. They were not worn to draw attention to the commandments. They were worn to draw attention to themselves. In addition, the Pharisees liked to be given seats of honor at the dinners. Now, those are the seats to the immediate right and to the left of the host. They liked the front seats in the synagogue. In Palestine, the back seats of the synagogue were occupied by children and less important people. The closer the seat was to the front, the higher the place of honor. And the most honor seats were at the very front. Those were the seats for the elders, and they actually faced out towards the congregation. If someone was seated up there, everyone would see who was in those seats. Those up front would conduct themselves throughout the service with great piety, which means people couldn't help but notice. Also, the Pharisees liked to be addressed as rabbi and expected to be treated with great respect. They claimed they should be respected more than parents. After all, parents only gave a person a physical life, but as teachers, they gave people eternal life. They liked to be called father, as Elisha or Elijah, because they were fathers of the faith. And Jesus looks at all this, and he says, enough is enough. He insists that people should remember that they only have one teacher, and that their teacher is Christ, and that they only have one Father, and that Father is God. The whole design of the Pharisees was to dress and to act in such a way as to draw attention to themselves. The whole design of the Christian should be to give of him or herself. If people see the charitable deeds of a Christian, then it will glorify the Father in heaven and not themselves. A religion that produces ostentatious, conspicuous consumption in actions and in pride is simply misguided. But Christianity, with sincere service to God and to fellow humans, does not glorify the believer, but glorifies God. Next Sunday is Dedication Sunday, when we'll bring our pledge cards forward as we make a financial commitment to the church for the next year. We come forward with that card. Its value a secret, known only to those who must know. And we'll place it in that big red shiny box. But we're not doing it to call attention to ourselves. We're not coming forward with a commitment to the work of the church and to the service of God who loves us and saves us so that everybody can see it. You don't need to wear fringes. You don't need to tie on your phylacteries. You don't need to walk down the aisle waving your pledge card. Probably if it was the Pharisees, they'd have a really big pledge card. Like those big checks when somebody wins a contest. Show everybody how much they're giving. No. This is not conspicuous consumption. It's humble obedience. It's our response to the calling of God, who asks for reverence and for respect. As for all the other things in our lives, be careful what you consume. Don't let what you consume you. Follow Jesus' example and let your actions be the witness to the risen Lord. Not by calling attention to yourself, but by calling attention to the one you serve. In the name of the Father and the Son